Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new World of Warships gameplay today on my channel. In this episode we'll be taking a look at one of my first gameplays featuring the Tier VI Italian heavy cruiser known as the Trento. The focus of this gameplay is not only for me to give you some initial impressions of the ship, but also to show you how I personally have used the ship to deal with a scenario where I've had to beat the retreat and pull back when a flank has collapsed. But in the process, I've been able to make use of some of the Trento's key gimmicks in order to be able to come out on top. Of course, with the assistance of teammates. Without further ado, let's get to it. As we load into the match, you can see it's a Tier VIII Domination game on the map Shards, and as always we are joined by our good friend Z, who's sailing out in the Tier VI premium French battleship known as the Dunkirk. As we take a look at our spawn, we'll note that our team spawned in on the southeastern side of the map, and in particular we're on the eastern edge. So our directive will be to go towards Objective Charlie forthwith. Now as we make our way up towards the objective, you'll note that our friendly Shards and Prince Eitel Friedrich make their way up as well, respectively the Tier VII Japanese destroyer and the Tier VI premium German battleship. The problem is, however, while there being Tier VIII carriers in play, is we have to be very careful not to drift apart from our allies and that way leave ships isolated from respective AA bubbles, because in doing so, particularly with the enemy having an Enterprise, the Tier VIII premium American carrier, a lone ship can be ripped apart in short order. So you'll note at the beginning of this, we are going to be clustering together to make sure that we've got overlapping fields of AA fire, and that will discourage the Enterprise from coming after us, and instead they're going to go down towards the southwest for the first 3 quarters of this game, their focus being on our teammates who have gone towards Objective Alpha. Now we can see the Enterprise's rocket fighters are making their way in, and in response, once we get spotted, we'll see that Z throws up his catapult fighter in preparation for a potential strike, the idea being that we'll be able to clear away the rest of the squadron after the first strike hits. But fortunately for us, the Enterprise becomes disincentivized and makes their way away completely. Now focusing particularly on our ship, we've got one problem to play around with the Trento. You'll note here that it's not fully upgraded. We have the stock hull, but otherwise we've got the upgraded rangefinder, which means we've got 16.1 kilometers range. So we've got good gun range, but we've also got poor detectability by sea. Our concealment extending out to 14.1 kilometers means that we are going to get spotted at long distances without concealment expert. Of course, we do not have that right now, but we are working towards it. So we do have to play at arm's length from Objective Charlie here. We cannot afford to get too close by comparison with, say, the British Tier VI light cruiser, the Leander, which has much better concealment by default. But we are going to work with our Shards and our teammates here to try and get Objective Charlie, or at least hold it. And we can see that the Enterprise going away now. It all comes down to on-sea tactics. And we can see that Charlie is being captured. Now at this point I suspected it was the enemy Mayhem because the Tier VII American destroyer is extremely strong in short range gunfights versus other destroyers, making it ideal for capturing objectives, what with the fact it's got 5 5-inch guns with a very high rate of fire, and those can bring down our Shards in due course. You can see that in return, our Shards is making its way towards Objective Charlie, and I'm having to hold my fire here, despite the fact some of the enemy battleships off in the distance, the Leon and King George V that have been spotted, are coming into my gun range, because I know that my sap shells are very effective against destroyers in particular, where they can do huge damage in short order. So I'm waiting for the Mayhem to be spotted, and because the Shards got better concealment than the Mayhem by default, our Shards is able to spot the Mayhem, and the Mayhem goes to its smoke, but because it's at a low speed in its smoke, we lead correctly and hit with 3 shells out of 8, dealing a whopping 4,700 damage and getting a full reset on their capture progress, as our Shards finally gets into the objective and starts to block the capture progress. Now it's at this point as well that it's worth noting that I'm having to think very carefully about the vision situation, because if we look on the minimap, our Prince Eitel Friedrich has moved back towards Bravo, and we can see that we now have a Hatsuhara in play up here on our team. But the problem is, our destroyers are not providing us with a good amount of vision. Our Shards is doing a great job of holding the Objective Charlie up and preventing the Mayhem from being able to take it and then move on, i.e. they're locking the Mayhem in place, but they're having to lock themselves in place as well to do so. And our Hatsuhara in the meanwhile is just sat on the southeastern side of Objective Charlie behind a landmass, providing very little vision other than that of the New Orleans that's up towards the northwestern side of the objective. That means that whilst Z's able to shoot at the New Orleans, we do not have any vision of what is off to the direct west of the objective, and our Hatsuhara is about to charge round there and find out. They're going to make their way around the southern hemisphere of the objective, they'll go onto the southwestern side, and they're going to be ambushed and blown to pieces. And that is the problem right now, in the fact we're having to play into a situation where we have so little visibility of what's going on that we're having to be patient, and when we're spotted here, we know that the only ship that's going to be spotting us, or we suspect, is the Mayhem, and as they reversed out their smoke to take a shot, we led as they went back into their smoke, and we hit with 5 shells and knock off a further 7,000 health, taking them down now massively and resetting all of their capture progress once again. But the problem is now, with our Shards leaving the objective and putting up a smoke screen, all vision of the objective is gone. We've lost our Hatsuhara as well, our Prince Eitel Friedrich has fallen away as well, and that means we now need to fall back. We cannot afford to stay here anymore, otherwise we're going to be next on the enemy's hit list and we won't be surviving for very long. Because we are 29,700 health maximum on our stock haul, we have got some durability but nowhere near enough to withstand a huge amount of fire. We are not a battleship or an armoured heavy cruiser in the vein of some of the German heavy cruisers later on in the tech trees. But at Tier 6 we do not have the armour just to bounce shells constantly, so we have to beat a retreat. And as we do so, you'll notice that I've thrown 2 sets of torpedoes, the 2x2 tubes, where we've thrown 1 set across Charlie and 1 set up towards our north to anticipate the Leon. The idea behind these torpedoes, what with their 12 km range and 51 knot speed, is just to try and dissuade enemy ships from pushing too aggressively through the fear of bumping into a torpedo, and you'll notice that the Leon, who gets us with some high explosive on the rear of our ship, takes a torpedo, and that's enough to slow them down a little bit, because now they've got to deal with a flood, and also they've got to deal with the ever-present threat of more torpedoes being inbound. At the same time, we've gone to our exhaust smoke generator, the idea being that with this smoke generator we're able to move at full speed whilst in smoke for a short period of time, and we do so to get away, and with the top speed of the Trento being in excess of 34 knots we're able to do so rather effectively, and we pull back a good distance here. We pull back by approximately 4 to 5 kilometers compared to our previous position, and it means we're able to get out of a tricky crossfire and move it into a single cone of incoming fire towards the rear of the ship. The Anshan goes towards its smoke and we throw a set of sap shells towards them. The idea being, once again, we want to try and hit them with at least 1, but unfortunately we only get an initial ricochet, and then the following part of the salvo does manage to hit them with a single shell that penetrates. We wanted more damage there to try and push them out of the game. But still, we'll take what we can get, and we can see that by retreating as much as we have right now, we've essentially turned this more into an open water situation where we can afford to kite and use our manoeuvrability and speed to try and dodge the incoming fire. Conversely, earlier it was more about being in closer ranges, which we struggle at, arguably, against some more heavily armoured ships, particularly battleships, simply because of the fact we've got that poor concealment, and also we're quite a big target. As we see, the enemy Nuremberg gets found out of position, Z's able to punish them with 1 salvo, and we do the same with a 2nd salvo, as we continue to take harassing fire from the Leon off in the distance, and with our another set of torpedoes which have gone north, we've sent them after where we fought the Leon and the King George for the 5th we're going to be coming through, and you'll see that the Leon takes a pair of them. But the problem here is, look at the minimap meanwhile. You can see on the minimap that our team is gradually taking Alpha, but we need them to hurry this up. They have a numbers advantage by a considerable margin down in the southwest, and meanwhile up in the northeast here I should say, we're having a significant amount of difficulty in the fact that we've got, well, you can count, but you can see that there's approximately 6 to 7 enemy ships up here dealing with 4 ships, and we have to keep pulling back, because if we do not, then the difficulty becomes the fact, simply put, that we're going to get overrun. But because we've offered such a quick retreat, what it means is the enemy team now has to try and figure out what they want to do with this retreat scenario. Do they push us hard and essentially chase us into the spawn? Or do they make their way towards Objective Bravo and then make their way to counter the push from our team in Objective Alpha? And it's this indecision by the enemy team that starts to turn the game around rather rapidly. And we're rather fortunate now in the fact that our Shards, in being moved into an open water situation, is providing us with a good amount of standoff distance versus the enemy team, and providing us with the vision we so desperately need in order to make this retreat scenario work. Because as the Mayhem now goes to smoke with very limited health remaining, partially due to the shells we've thrown in and some from our Shards, and you'll see that the Shards finishes them off, it means now the enemy team has lost that destroyer. The only destroyer they've got left is their Anshan. Now the problem is with this, of course, is that the Anshan is going to be able to provide a good amount of vision control, because we do not know where they currently are. We know they were last spotted a little bit northwest of us behind a landmass, but we suspect, given the fact we're still detected right now, that they're off to our immediate west, and you'll see I'm going to ping that on the map in short order. The problem with this is the fact that whilst they are spotting us, we cannot safely make rotations of our ship without exposing our broadside to the enemy fleet up in the north. And I'm going to be moving forward now as I mark on the minimap where I think the Anshan is, albeit you're going to see they are a lot further towards the south than they are west, in comparison with the position that I denoted, as they're going after our Graf Zeppelin. But I have to throw out the exhaust fume smoke generator here, because at the same time as being able to make this turn, if we want to make it safely, we need to have some smoke to do so. And that's what this consumable is all about, giving you the opportunity to get out of difficult situations. The thing is, of course, that Leon there, if they'd been throwing armour piercing, they could have potentially citadeled us and taken us out of the game. But they were still loading high explosive, much like earlier. It was a gamble, but it's worked out in our favour, and so that means we live to fight another day with still 12,500 health in our pocket. But for now, we have to just play the waiting game. We have to be patient here and wait until our team clears Objective Alpha. They've done so for the most part. You can see on the minimap they are starting to make their way up the western side of the map, but it's going to take a long time because they're so far away right now, and a good number of the ships there are not too rapid, particularly the Warspite, for example, which has a rather limited top speed. So we just have to play the game here of waiting for the situation to come back into our favour. We can see that the enemy team does have 2 objectives to our 1, but there's a lot of life left in this game. With there being approximately 10 minutes remaining, it is not over yet. There is no rush to have to make a major play. Although I say that, with the Anshan taking out our carrier, now the problem does arise in the fact that we have no air presence, or very limited air presence, until the Graf Zeppelin's rocket planes finally fade away. The Anshan's gone to a smoke screen here, but in return you'll note that our Shiratsu has found itself now way too close to the enemy fleet and without support, having gone to smoke right in front of the enemy's New Orleans, who's just going to push through that smoke with a hydro set by the looks of things and take them out of the game. And it means that we've lost our destroyer and we're going to have no more vision from a destroyer class ship in this match, as the Shiratsu finally falls to the enemy team, and the enemy Anshan in return is making their way in open water, but is being spotted by the Graf Zeppelin's rocket fighters, and our Prince Eitel Friedrich is doing a very good job of harassing them and trying to take them down. But again, this puts a bit more frustration on myself and Z, and keep in mind Z has been pretty much sat alongside the border here, just tanking damage where he has been available to, because of the fact we have no pushing power right now. We just have to let the enemy team's push blunt itself out versus our defense, whilst we're buying our team time to make their way from Alpha up towards Bravo and subsequently up towards Objective Charlie. And you'll note that the number of ships on each team is gradually turning more and more in our team's favour, because we've had to play this patient game. We've had to play this hard defence, and also withdraw as much as possible and use the maximum range of our guns to good effect. And that's why we've been playing at such a standoff distance with the 16.1 kilometres on the 8-inch guns of the Trento, because we have that range to manipulate the engagement, so let's do so. And you'll see that the enemy New Orleans has now pushed out the Shiratsuyu smoke, i.e. now dead friendly Shiratsuyu. They pushed out the smoke, realised it's too far forward for them to be able to be supported by their teammates, who in return are pulling back as well, the Leon and the King George in particular. So this has gone from an enemy push to now an enemy retreat, and with the enemy Anshan making their way towards Objective Alpha, our Prince Eitel Friedrich is going to cut them off and take them out of the game. So the Anshan on the enemy team has overextended as a destroyer, whereas it really needs to be a bit further back towards its fleet. Because of the fact it's gone so far forward, it means they are going to fall to our friendly ship, and now we can start to make the charge back. Albeit, the Anshan did take out our Warspite before they're able to get taken out by our Prince Eitel Friedrich, and well done to them. But in return, Z takes out the New Orleans, and now the game is in our team's favour, because every ingress that the enemy team has made towards our spawn or towards our objective, i.e. Objective Alpha, has now been defeated. Their push has been completely blunted, and it means they are now in full retreat, and we can now go back on the offensive. But it's not been the most entertaining of scenarios, simply because we've had to wait until the game has developed into our team's favour. We've been at the mercy of teammates off on the other side of the map. But you can see now this Leon, for example, finds themselves caught in a crossfire between myself and Z on the south side, and on their western side we've got the rest of our team that are coming up from Alpha. And that means we're going to start to take Objective Bravo, particularly our Knives Out and Surrey are going to take the objective, and we can continue to push forward as Leon throws another high explosive salvo towards us. And here, please do not mind the gunnery. Still getting used to the muzzle velocity of the sap shells on the Trento, but we're going to improve our gunnery over due course. But you can see that the shells do have a good initial muzzle velocity of 840 meters per second, but they seem to just become very slow as they hit over the top of their parabola. But as we continue to make our way up then, we're now going to be deploying our speed, as is Z, to get our way up towards Objective Charlie, and at this point it becomes a very gradual saunter up towards the objective. Now some other thoughts on the Trento in particular, whilst we've got a bit of a breather here. One of the things I've enjoyed most about this ship so far is her flexibility in terms of her speed and how that can be played in tandem with the exhaust smoke generator consumable. The fact that you can retreat or turn around in rather short order. The only problems I have found with the ship, albeit this is with the stock hull, mind you, and not the upgraded hull, is that she does feel a little bit lumbering in terms of her handling compared to other heavy cruisers or cruisers at her tier, although I cannot complain because of the size of the ship. And I'm hopeful that the improvements to the manoeuvrability with the B hull, particularly on the rudder shift, just give her a little bit more handling characteristics which make her favourable when you're in some of those closer knit situations. I found the guns, as you've seen here, probably multiple salvos, I found the guns to be a little bit hit and miss in the fact you can get some absolutely blinding salvos with the guns, but in return the dispersion clusters sometimes just feel a little bit wide compared to what I may be used to, such as on the Pensacola, the Tier VI American heavy cruiser counterpart. But again, this is only after approximately 5 to 6 games with the ship, so we've got a lot more time to spend in it, as it is a rather nice looking ship, and it's also one which I think with quite a bit of time and practice can prove very handy. But coming back to the game at hand, we can see that the enemy enterprises are now focusing down our Nizal in tandem with their King George V. The two working together to implement damage over time here, and also just some raw alpha strike damage, what the torpedo bombers and the high explosive from the King George V, and our Nizal will be falling in short order. And our team is still down in terms of points, so the thing we've got to get a move on with here is taking Objective Charlie, or at least blocking the capture progress, because if we can do so, then that takes away any avenue for the enemy team to get back into the game in terms of just gradually accreting point score. Of course, the enemy team can still win by eliminating ships. We've only got 4 minutes to go here, and the enemy team does have a sizable points advantage, albeit a diminishing one of 150 points or so. And at this point we throw up our catapult fighter in order to try and push the Enterprise away. We also throw up our exhaust smoke generator here. Now you're probably wondering why have we done that? We've thrown up the catapult fighter in order to try and help Z not be harassed by the Enterprise. I make it look as though if they're going to attack Z, then they've got to go through 2 catapult fighters and trigger both of them. And we've gone to our exhaust smoke. The reason for that is so we can push further forward versus the King George before they're able to see us and return fire. Of course, so long as we shoot at a target with a distance of 8.7 kilometers or more between us and the enemy ships around us, then we won't be spotted when we fire with our smoke. That's our smoke fire penalty of 8.7 kilometers. And in doing so, we can just creep a little bit closer in order to shorten the shell travel time and get some more reliable and consistent salvos, as we get quite a meaty one there for 5,700 on the King George's superstructure, and then completely fluff this second salvo from what I remember. But the point stands, and we're making our way in towards Objective Charlie now, and we do spot the Enterprise off towards our starboard side, albeit we're not going to be hunting the Enterprise here, we're more focused on the objective, and the Enterprise is going to make a pass on us now that the vicinity, the air has cleared for their aircraft to come in, i.e. there's no catapult fighters available to us or Z, because we deployed our fighters in tandem with one another. But the flip side of this is that every so often RNG just favours you, and this Enterprise strike is going to be at the rather embarrassing nature of RNG in the fact it is going to completely miss. Or some of you could argue that I just dodged all the incoming bombs, right? But regardless of that, and a little bit of sarcasm aside, the game's now just going to play out with regards to us throwing some shells at the King George, albeit the King George falls to our own King George, and now it's a case of waiting for our team to wear down the Enterprise or for the score to tick over in our team's favour and for the win to be picked up. But of course there's enough time available that everybody will take down the Enterprise in short order as they try to make their own little retreat behind a landmass for cover. Z's throwing in a couple of salvos here, as is our Surrey. We're also going to throw in a follow-up salvo over the landmasses here, albeit it does very little, it over-penetrates the ship, and our King George will be finishing off the Enterprise with their next salvo. But as we throw the shells in here, you can see that we've got reasonably high shell arcs on these 8-inch guns. It's something not to be scoffed at. Quite nice shell arcs, if I must be honest with you. And the Enterprise is about to fall to our King George. And that'll wrap up the game. With the victory in the bag, we can see our battle performance amounted to a damage output of 76,016 HP, and we did not pick up any achievements this time around. Coming onto the team scores, we can see that we placed second on our team in terms of base experience earned with 1,811, 5 short of first place which went to Z. Our joint role in this game was to hold the flank around C for as long as possible and simply try and waste the enemy team's time and frustrate their firepower to give our teammates down towards Objective Alpha all the time they needed to secure that objective and start to cleave their way back through the map in order to secure Bravo and eventually close the door on Objective Charlie for the enemy team and help us all pick up the win. We did so by starting off an offensive posture on an individual level, getting as close as possible as we dared to the objective to support our destroyers in the destroyer versus destroyer engagements, making good use of our SAP shells or semi-armor piercing shells versus the enemy Mayhem in particular, weakening and helping our team to eliminate a very potent destroyer in the match. After that, we used our exhaust smoke generator plus also our ship's manoeuvrability to pull back as far as possible and get to the extremity of our gun range, that's 16.1 kilometers, to just constantly rain down fire, whether it be limited or rather powerful, just doing some damage and chipping away at the enemy's offensive until it finally crumbled under the sustained pressure of our defensive work and our team's offensive work off towards the western side. Coming on to our detailed report, we have one item to note, and that is in the damage module category, where we can see that our steering was knocked out 3 times in this match, and that aligns with a trend I have noticed with the Trento, in that its steering seems to be quite vulnerable to high explosive shells. So we'll keep our eyes on that one and see whether we can find a way to mitigate that in the future. And finally, coming on to credits and experience earned, we can see that after additions and deductions, we walked away with 286,086 credits, and 7,863 Commander experience. With that, that's all we've got time for today, but you can be sure that we'll be coming back to the Trento in due course in order to take a more in-depth look at the ship once she's fully spec'd, upgraded and got a much more experienced captain on her. But until then, I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future videos on my channel. But until next time, as always ladies and gentlemen, fair winds and following seas.